years to meet people in my life as a police officer and a detective who have become heroes to me, and those include a group of individuals that I've worked with for sometimes for many years, and those are child victims of sex crimes. And in our profession over the past 20 plus years that I've been a police officer, we've made some real progress in working with clinicians, with doctors, to make sure that our investigation and our response to sex crimes involving children is trauma-informed and really cares about the kids. And yet, thinking of a child victim of a sex crime and meeting them and interacting with them is still something that it's life-changing, and it's the most difficult work, but also the most rewarding work that I've been involved in. Having said all that, we have here someone today that I just met today, and a new person that's become a hero of mine, and that's Miss Irma Shaw. And as I mentioned, the progress we've made over the past few decades. When Irma was 12 years old, in 1978, she was the victim of a sex crime, a heinous crime, and we're going to tell you a little bit about this very interesting and very terrifying story right now. And Officer Joe Garrett from the U.S. Marshals Task Force is going to provide you some information, and then I'll introduce you to Irma.
Hey folks, Joe Garrett, Grand Rapids officer, assigned to the U.S. Marshal Future Task Force. Thank you, Chief, appreciate you. This case came to me in 2017. The FBI had it prior to that, and we ran a story then. We got one tip, silent observer tip, at that point, but not a lot of help on this. The person we're about to talk about is Tommie Lee Hill. Back in the 60s, he began raping children, we believe, and then finally in 78, Irma came forward and brought to the attention of GRPD. We've got a timeline that you all are welcome to have, has incident numbers on there, etc. It was brought to our attention that Mr. Hill at that time was even raping children in Terre Haute prison in Indiana. There's documentation of that as well. He was sent from Terre Haute back to GRPD, and nobody here is probably old enough to remember, but back in 1979 he was getting sentenced for a Grand Rapids CSC involving Miss Shaw, Miss Irma Major at the time though. And he went into he said he was thirsty, he went to the women's bathroom, and then from there escaped authorities at the courthouse during his sentencing on Monroe Avenue, had a getaway car, and was gone for the foreseeable future. He was picked up in Mississippi and resentenced back to Terre Haute. There was a paperwork error, and they let him go in Vigo, Indiana on a paperwork mistake, never to be seen again by Grand Rapids authorities. Miss Shaw here has worked with me, emailed me, texted me for 7 years, and we were doing facial recognition stuff, social media stuff. Finally caught a break. We got a genealogy trail that led us to Pittsburgh. I sent Vanessa Robertson from the U.S. Marshal Service the information. She gave me an amazing analytic chart of 9 contacts to make contact with in Pittsburgh. From there, Detective Knoxon and I did a boots down, boots on the ground, sort of blue collar investigation. We knocked on the door of 6 out of the 9 contacts in Pittsburgh, and all of them had a similar sentiment of 40 years ago, recalling that this guy was not right, that he raped children, and they had all had similar stories about somebody in their family that he had molested or raped. We finally met one contact who gave us a timeline. This gentleman has changed his name to Abdullah Muhammad. He was a serial rapist. That led us to Pittsburgh PD on April 23rd, and we went down to the archives in the basement of the headquarters there, and this 78-year-old detective, just like you see in the movies with the gray hair, suit, he brings out a carton with a file for a man named Muhammad Abdullah. And it was brought to our attention that this was the gentleman that had fled our authorities and that had raped so many of kids here in Grand Rapids back in the 70s and 80s. I shared those pictures with Ms. Shaw, and she confirmed that that was Tommie Lee Hill. He had changed his name and been living in Pittsburgh from about 1980 to 1983. What happened in 1983 is he was shot in the back of the head, December 4, 1983, by a man named Vernon Phipps after he had touched Vernon's sister. So he got his own level of street justice, it seems. So that brought us to where we are now. If you have any questions for me, I'd happily field them. There are pictures on page 77 of her book of Tommie Lee Hill, aka Abdullah Muhammad. Also, I have a pretty extensive knowledge of him and things that he did. So, if there are questions for me, I can field them afterwards. But otherwise, I'm going to turn it over to Miss Irma Major Shaw.
Thank you for coming today. I really want to thank the Chief of Police. I want to thank Grand Rapids Police Department. I want to thank Officer Garrett. I want to thank the United States Marshal and anyone and everyone that have supported me through this 46-year journey. It has been a journey. I was a kid then, but I stand here as a fully mature adult woman. I'm holding my book because of the fact that Tommie had gotten away for so many years. On my heart, I knew that if he was still alive, he would still be victimizing children. And because of social media, I thought that I would create and write my own book. And there was a $7,000 reward that was issued, which I thought would be an incentive to anyone to, if they knew where he was at, dead or alive, to be able to call and report it and remain silent. And so I wrote this book in 2018, looking for allies. But what is so unique is on page 75 of this book, I said, he can change his name, but what he can't change is his DNA. And what if he left the evidence many years ago, before technology was created, that would lead to the capture or the information about his death? And so I consider that to be very prophetic for me to have written that in 2018, as it was definitely part of the catalyst of why we are here today standing saying that 46 years it may have taken us to really identify where he was, but the justice was served, and in a lot of ways he did it to himself by helping us to be able to know where he was at. A family member had shared with me many years ago that they thought he was in Pittsburgh. They just didn't know the name that he was using. In a lot of ways, I feel as though I feel very grateful. I feel very grateful that I can go when that time comes to glory, but I will go with a level of knowing that this was resolved and it was closed. And even more importantly, I got introduced to a part of myself that I never knew existed. Because if you're someone who's lived with an unresolved issue since you were 12, I knew Irma as a 12-year-old kid. I didn't know Irma as a fully functional adult, because so much of me was reserved to be able to contact and be persevering with the marshals and the detectives and the police department. And so the fact that I got introduced to myself, I feel so grateful to be able to fully meet me and live a life where I no longer look over the back of my shoulders. And the reason that I did that is not only for myself, but because I knew the heart of this man would continue to victimize because of who he was. And so I was not only looking out for myself, but I was also thinking about those kids who may not have known who he truly was. So to know that he got justice and that fewer kids have been victimized by this man is something that I am eternally grateful for. I thank God for that. I thank God, not that he was murdered, because I really wanted to face him. I think Marshal Officer Garrett had asked me, like, Irma, do you really think he's alive? I said, I know that he is, because something in my spirit is saying that he's looking for the day where he will face me. But unfortunately, it didn't turn out that way. But thank you for being here today. Yes.
Oh, go ahead. Oh,
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Just right off that point, you wish he was alive so you could have faced him. What would you have said in that moment if you had that opportunity?
What I would have said is, when I was a child and I was weak, you were able to take advantage of me. But I'm no longer a victim here. I am triumphant, because I've overcome this. And in many ways, my test, and that's what you put me through, is now my testimony. And so I get to utilize my experience to help other women and other children that have went through that. So you didn't win. You didn't win. And I am the victor. That's what I would have said.
How old were you?
12. 12. And not only was I molested by Mr. Hill, I have to also tell you that I was impregnated by him. So I have a child that's buried in a cemetery because of him.
How many victims do you believe he took in the Grand Rapids area?
So there's documentation of 2 for sure in Grand Rapids, and then there is documentation of 2 in Terre Haute and through the BOP. And then the folks that we talked to in Pittsburgh, it started to bring back some real hard feelings for some of the women that we talked to that were about Irma's age, because of they believe that 3 or 4 of the children out there were also molested or raped. But I asked them why they didn't come to the police, and they said that's just something they didn't do back then. Vernon Phipps, the man who shot, ended up shooting Tommie, December 4 of '83. Tommie had molested his sister, and he had just had enough.
You said you were first informed about this case in 2017 because of a silent observer tip. What exactly was that tip?
So actually, I was informed of it. It was given to us from the FBI team. The U.S. Marshal Service adopted it. I should explain that. I'm a Grand Rapids officer. I'm assigned to the U.S. Marshal Fugitive Task Force. So we ran a story with Irma at that time and hoping to generate SO tips. And I got 1 SO tip. It was interesting looking back. A female called and said, hey, that guy 40 years ago, he was broke down on the side of, I think, 80 towards Pennsylvania. And I recognized that guy like it was palpable to her. So I mean, she was onto something there, obviously.
You ran a news story? Is that what you mean when you say you ran a story?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Correct.
You said genealogy. We've heard a lot of cases being broke open because of forensic genetic genealogy. Is this typical with CODIS genealogy, or can you explain that?
Yeah, some of the stuff that we deal with is really sensitive, and I can't give some of my sources that way, but you're absolutely onto the right thing. Obviously, in the 70s and 80s, there wasn't some of the APHIS and some of the CODIS stuff that we have now. So there was never any trail to him. In fact, to be perfectly honest with you, he was fingerprinted after his death on December 5 of 1983, the day afterwards, and it came back no record. Obviously, he should have had a record through the BOP. I just think that the APHIS system wasn't what it is now.
When you talk about the paperwork issue, can you elaborate on what?
Yeah, so this is all the paperwork I have on Tommie Lee Hill. In Vigo County, Indiana, there was just a mistake. There was a clerical mistake, and he was supposed to come back to serve 20 to 40 years for rapes here in Grand Rapids County, and from Terre Haute, Indiana to there was just a disconnect, and I can't really expound on what the clerical error was, because I was like 2 years old, but.
But I guess when you're sitting here now, and all of you, I mean, for a while, we might have thought this guy could have still been on the loose, and you know that, he's been deceased for a while. I mean, what's the reaction now that, you've learned he's dead, right? But,
Yeah, fortunately, I think Irma and I agree that we're glad that he wasn't out raping more children. I joked that maybe they should have given Mr. Phipps the key to the city in Pittsburgh when that happened, but I think Irma can expound on that more. I think her breaking down and her raw reaction to when she found out about it.
I think one of the values of us being here today is because other people are victims, and sometimes it takes a long time in order for justice to be served. But I want victims to know that the Grand Rapids Police Department will continue to work for them. And even though their case may be different, is the fact that we've got a police department that works hard for its citizens. And also, I want to thank Mayor Bliss, because we've got a mayor that supports the police department as well. And even for those who may be lacking hope, I was feeling hopeless, like I'll never get an answer. But with the change in technology, something that you couldn't have answered yesterday, tomorrow may be able to be solved. And so I want to encourage victims to know that there is hope and there could be justice. And so don't give up. Trust the Grand Rapids Police Department that they'll continue to work for you, and your day will come. Your day will come.
What kind of closure did you have when you found out this man was passed away and that you weren't going to have an opportunity to face him in court?
You know, when I sat down and he said we caught him, I became very emotional because that morning I woke up. I am a widow right now, and so I'm going to get a little emotional right now because that day when I woke up, I told my daughter, I said, I feel like I'm going to my husband's funeral. It's the thing where you don't want to go, but you know you got to go. It's the meeting you don't want to attend, but there is no other time to attend. It's the thing you wish you could be dreaming about and that this was someone else's journey. But that day I knew that this was a step that I had to take. And it was actually a step that I had to take by myself. And so when I heard that information, I became very excited and emotional because at least there was an answer. And because I'm a realist, I asked myself this morning, Irma, what are you prepared for? There can only be 3 answers. We got him, we couldn't find him, or he's dead. Which of the 3 could you live with? The one that I couldn't live with is that we couldn't find him. The other 2 I was able to live with. So I was able to say that I'm free, and I was able to live, as I said, and get introduced. And I hadn't even thought about I would be introduced to a part of myself. So there was a lot of gratitude, very little disappointment. I wasn't disappointed that I wouldn't look him in the face because I knew the number of victims that, a number of people that was not victimized as a result of him. So.
What would you have to say about the importance in continuing to pursue these cold cases 20, 30 years afterwards and being able to at least find some measure of closure for victims?
I would actually say, you know, that because the police department is probably limited with funds, that if there's any way, if I could even start a nonprofit to be able to allocate dollars for cold cases, that would be something that probably would be beneficial because, of course, it comes down to dollars, comes down to resources, and if there's a way that we can give them the resources, I think it would definitely be worth it. I know that other victims would feel probably just like me, grateful, but even more importantly, they would sleep better. They wouldn't have to look over their shoulders or worry about other people that may have come as a result of what they've encountered by the hands of their perpetrator.
When was the actual discovery made that this update prompted?
The discovery that he was, that he had passed?
Yeah.
So we drove out there on April 21st, April 22nd were the investigations, and then April 23rd in the headquarters of Pittsburgh PD. So April 23rd is the day that we just made the actual discovery.
How did you discover that he changed his name?
The people that we had spoken to out there confirmed what the genealogy report said. He had remarried a woman in 1980, 1981, that's a little bit unclear, and lived with her until 1983. That woman since passed 2 years ago, so that made it difficult because we couldn't talk to her.
For clarification, is it Abdul Muhammad or Muhammad Abdul?
Well, he has 4 names. He had 4 names, 4 social security numbers, and he varied this last name with the spelling. It's Abdullah Muhammad on his death certificate, but he would spell it with an N, sometimes without an N. Abdullah Muhammad, and I can get you all the clarification on that.
Had he been alive, would there have even been a trial? Like, is there a statute of limitations on a child sex crime?
He was already sentenced, so the warrant was still in lien, NCIC, so he would have served out the rest of his prison sentence. You know.
How often are you tracking cold cases that don't involve homicide? I feel like that's typically what we hear about.
That's fair. You know, the department was actually very gracious. I've been a proponent of getting boots down on the ground in other cities because it's more palpable, I think, to us when the case is our baby, and instead of just sending a lead out. And they were really gracious in this case. So we do have cold cases. I have cases from 10, 15 years ago on my desk.
How much does it cost to go through that genealogy process?
I don't know the raw numbers on that. I would
Just
not be.
curious.
I don't know, Chief, if you would.
I don't know.
What would you tell families that are currently sitting waiting for answers for a cold case, be it murder, whatnot when they're just, they're stuck in that limbo for whether it's 2 months or 20 years.
Yeah, I think that's where how Irma probably felt. We stay in contact together, and it's so hard. I can only imagine. I read every police report of every victim of every criminal sexual conduct fugitive that I have, and you know, it sometimes brings tears to your eyes at how these kids are abused. So I can only imagine how they feel, wondering if the police or law enforcement or U.S. Marshal Service is looking for that fugitive that harmed their child. It's very hard. It's hard as an investigator too, but we try to keep in contact with them and try to keep them abreast on the process.
Can I add something?
Absolutely.
I think that it's really important that even as a victim, that you, if you can, if you've got the scope or the capacity to be your greatest advocate. I know that I felt sometimes like I was being a bother because I'm like, hey, we get any more information? Hey, it's been 30 days, it's been a year, right? But I kept a part of me reserved for the journey, and so that I wouldn't give up, and so that they would remember me. And so then I did one step further and wrote my own book. Not only did I write my own book, I did audio book. I self-published it on Amazon because I put a picture of this man in there, and I wanted people to be able to see it. So if there's a person out there that's been a victim and they've got that person's name, you know, social media is a great platform. I would use that as much as they can. Like I said, it's depending on the capacity of the person, because I know that everybody is not like me, but I believe that they may have somebody like me in their life that could be that person to take it to another level, to help them, to help the police department.
Was there any moment where you did consider, like, and we've been going at this for so long, is it even worth it?
No, there was never that moment, but because I'm a widow, and because so many of my family members are deceased, I just was pushing that it would happen in my lifetime, that I would be alive to see it. So as long as I had breath in my body, my goal was to stay at it, right? As long as I had air in my body until somebody told me he was dead or where he was, I knew that I was the victim. So who else would be leading or be the champion if it wasn't me? Because they've got so many other cases and, you know, limited resources. So I was mindful of that.
Just to get a number on the number of survivors and victims here, I mean, 2 in Grand Rapids, 2 in Indiana, more in Pittsburgh. I mean, rough number, how many do you suspect overall?
I don't remember. What do you think? You know the family.
You know what? I've heard that even before me, 10 years even before me, that he was doing this to other members in this community. He's probably got 30 to 40 victims, and that's the people. And it may not have just been molestation. It was abuse. It was assault. I think he was somewhere between escaping here for somebody. So this man was very violent. So it wasn't just criminal sexual conduct. It was, as it relates, I've got access to the Grand Rapids Press archives where I was able to Google his name and saw other things he had done and other victims. So, you know.
Is it weird to get so familiar with someone who assaulted you in that way? Because you're obviously looking into him for different reasons, but you still get to have an interesting relationship with someone who caused you so much trauma.
Well, you know, I've never looked at it that way, so that's a great question. Part of my passion is genealogy, and so with that passion comes learning about someone and learning probably more things than what they would want to share with you. And because I was trying to advocate for myself, I needed to learn as much about him as I could. So I was contacting relatives, and for years I've been doing that. Have you heard from him? When is the last time you saw him? And one of his family members had told me, an extended family member, that they had seen him in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, maybe in early 90s or something, but they couldn't remember the name that he was using. So, you know, the familiarity came as a result of me just being diligent, but I've never looked at it as me becoming familiar versus I'm doing the work. You know, researching is what I do.
that just struck me when the question came about total number of victims. And I don't think there's probably anybody in this room that really feels bad about how Mr. Hill's life ended. Well, it's been called street justice, but I think it's important to keep in mind the journey he took here, all the victims that he victimized here. Is tough, Irma. I don't know how you stand up here and let me just say, the beginning of the end of his count of victims was 12-year-old Irma going up in front of a jury, in front of a judge, in public, and testifying against this monster. And if it wasn't for 12-year-old Irma being a brave, amazing 12-year-old, there's an excellent chance that we could be talking double or triple the number of victims. So I want to thank, I know Irma came up here and you're like a professional at this. But this isn't easy to stand in front of you guys like this. But looking back in the 70s, to have a 12-year-old testifying against the man who raped her, I'm just just in awe of this woman, and I described you as one of my heroes already, and so thanks for coming today, and thank you guys for covering it. We appreciate you.
Chief, what are your thoughts on sort of, obviously, when this individual was released, this was before you were probably even considering training to be a police officer, but how important is it to you to sort of rectify some of those mistakes from past departments not even out of there, but I guess really how important is it to you to, I guess, do better?
Extremely important, and especially in the field of where we're talking about the most extreme crimes, murder, sexual assault against children. There wasn't such a long time ago that the statute of limitations was such that if a child didn't let us know by the time they were 22 or 23 that something had happened, even if they couldn't really come to terms with it until later, it was past the statute of limitations. There was nothing we could do. So the changes in law that are headed in the right direction, obviously the changes in technology. Joe talked about how even when this man died, they took his fingerprints and they ran it through the system once and they said, oh, he's clear. He obviously was not clear. That was a fault in technology. DNA is something that's changed the game as far as policing is concerned, and so we always have to make sure that we're doing better. And the biggest example today that I can give is that we are able to provide some amount of closure to Irma, and that's what we want to do for everybody that's suffering like this.
Just want to ask a little more about this man's history. I mean, before, you know, the charges and convictions and the trials and the escape. I mean, talk a bit about his background. How did he get in this position? And, you know, yeah, things like this.
Well, he was born into it. He's Tommie Lee Hill Jr. Tommie Lee Hill Sr. killed a police officer, actually. So I'm not gonna give him any sympathy or anything like that, but he was probably born into a rough situation. And as far as the sexual assaults and everything else, I think we've documented that. I do have a timeline for, that's available for all of you guys here. But as far as the CCH before that, it's pretty long, extensive, from assaults, rapes, and felonious assaults.
Yeah, and I just want to say, I can't just emphasize enough how much policing has changed with this sort of crime, that we're talking about something that in the 70s, well, even today, it's estimated that over half of child sex crime cases or more go unreported even. So many victims, Tommie Lee Hill, and one that came forward was willing to talk to the police. I'm sure she had to talk to the prosecutor. I'm sure she had to talk to the doctor. She had to do all these things, which now, in this day and age, we have for example, the Kent County Children's Advocacy Center, where the child comes and has one victim-sensitive interview, talks to one trained person on how to talk to children. That was not anywhere, that wasn't even anybody's thought at the time. I'm sure, I mean, you're likely to walk into a police station and see somebody behind the desk smoking a cigarette and taking your report, and you want a child to go up and give information about a sex crime. Children weren't believed. A lot of time women in domestic violence situations weren't believed. This was so uncommon to have somebody with the strength, with the fortitude to come forward and then to testify at a court like this, I'm telling you, Irma made all the difference in probably dozens of child's lives. As this man, after she stood up, after she did what she did, he was on the run. And I'm sure that was a game changer. And yeah, I just can't say enough how impressed. It was a different world for child sex victims back in 1978, and this is such a big deal.
How did you know this, that Tommie Lee Hill girl? How did this all happen?
Are you asking me?
Oh, yes.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, Stefan.
Well, believe it or not, he was my stepfather. I knew him since I was 3. I called him Daddy because he was the only father that lived in the house with me at the time that I was 3. Him and my mother was married actually on her birthday. But he was also a player in my early childhood and somewhat, I think, contributed to his escape because at that time the detective, I think she was a family worker when I was removed from my mother's care because he wasn't married to my mother. And back in 1968, I think there was some laws that says my mother is a married woman who's living with a man who's got an illegitimate child, but she's married to another man. So we were removed from her custody until she divorced my birth father and married him. And so he became familiar with the person who later became a detective when he escaped. And so that familiarity with my family, I think, came as a result of when I was 3 years old. And the moral standards of conduct was a factor then.
You'd be kind of panicked for most of your life, wouldn't you, thinking he's gonna come after you?
I didn't panic, but I knew what he looked like, and I remembered. So, even if I traveled abroad, I would look. If I went to Chicago, Detroit, anywhere, I even moved to Phoenix, relocated to Phoenix. But even in Phoenix, I looked for him. I looked for him everywhere I was at because he was someone I was familiar with, and he was someone who had a 20 to 40-year sentence with my name on it.
As far as genealogy goes, sorry. So, you obviously got DNA from family members down there? Or I don't know if it's not.
Yeah, I can't really comment on that, but yeah.
But that's all this thing's working, right? You have to, you're at and then narrow it down.
Yeah, we had like I said, we had a U.S. Marshal analyst, Vanessa Robertson. She deserves a lot of this credit. I asked her if I could use her name. Really, the 2 catalysts were Irma and her. She gave us those 9 contacts to talk to in Pittsburgh, and we even had the local police called on us on one of the contacts. They were kind of concerned about Grand Rapids police officers would be there, but we got 6 of them to talk to us pretty well.
Appreciate you guys taking the time to cover this today.
And one last thing, if I could say anything. This is a book about hope. If it's okay with you, I would like to read something. Most people like stories, this is my prologue, and prefer fables, but rarely want the truth. I am aware that everyone cannot handle candor. As for myself, I prefer reality over lies and deception. This autobiography will be unlike any other that you have read, and that is deliberate because my life has been an extraordinary journey. I have written my story to encourage others that have struggled or currently struggling in similar situations. My hope and prayer are that you will be informed and enlightened, no matter how difficult it is to stand in the fullness of your truth, and one day find strength to inspire others. I want to express a thank you, a special thank you, to Richard for his contributions to this project. Our chemistry and collaboration are intertwined throughout this book. He encouraged me to take people along your journey and freely express feelings and emotions. And so I hope that someone will feel encouraged. I hope that if you're looking for a way to support me, if that's what you want to do, prayers I can always accept. But the best way to support me is by telling your truth, writing your own story, And if you've been a victim, to call the police. If you know someone who's been a victim, especially of childhood molestation, that you would call and that you would be the person that would advocate to bring justice for that victim. So thank you.
Thanks, guys.